Hello and welcome. Well, earlier this year, J.K. Rowling got a tweet which said, "My dream is to be a writer, but my parents always say that this is not a worthy profession. What do I do to change this?" In typical Rowling candor, she replied, "Do what I did. Pretend you want to do something else and write on the sly until you're free to do whatever you want." Well, that might not be the case for everyone, but it shows that in so many parts of the world, writing still doesn't cut it, especially as a profession. What about India's young? Like I was just speaking to my panel and delighted to see that they were actually in agreement. The shelves in bookshops that have Indian writing just seem to be expanding. Is that really connected to Indians reading Indian writers anymore? What about the demand for Indian writing in the market, and who are the Indian writers who are being talked about or who are publishing their work that is being read? Well, that's what we are looking at today, a very special panel. Amitabh Bagchi, let me start by asking you, when you look around you, do you see that there are enough youngsters who want to take to writing, and importantly enough their family that's going to encourage them or say it's okay as a hobby, but that's what it should remain?
Well, I think that there is certainly an increasing number. Compared to 10 years or 15 years ago, the number has increased tremendously. And I think that we are moving into a different time where there's a culture of celebrity in our country, which was not so much there 10, 15 years ago. And so, you know, some of these parents probably are thinking of it in the same way as parents of kids who are going on, I don't know, Saregama Kids are seeing it, that, you know, maybe this is a moment of fame and fortune. Of course, they don't realize that there's a lot of toil and struggle and so on. Of course, I'm sure it's the same for people on Saregama Kids.
Right, right, yeah. Sharanya, give us a sense of what it's been like for you. How much of this sort of desire to be in this celebrity mode do you see of people around you? This is not necessarily your own example that I'm talking about. And how much of it is sort of a desire to write and want to tell the stories that you perhaps have in your head somewhere or somewhere deep inside you?
Personally, I haven't seen so much of the desire to be an artistic celebrity. But I think my background is very subjective, because I went to this really sort of liberal middle class school, and essentially if you want to be a writer, you don't want to be a celebrity writer, but you want to be someone who gets famous later, you know, something like that. Like you want to be a bit underground. Right. That was the whole idea that I grew up with. So
I love the liberal middle class, because that's, I mean, on a completely different note, that's exactly what sort of doesn't sit quite well these days. But anyway, carry on.
Yeah, but so we, like when I was growing up, we didn't want to, no one wanted to be, for example, Paulo Coelho, but we wanted to be Jack Kerouac, you know, like that's the difference.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt, but tell me very quickly, this is what you do. You are now a full-time...
I don't say it.
...writer. But is that sort of, how do you sort of see yourself? This is not something that you're doing alongside something else?
No.
This whole and soul?
I don't make any money off it. So essentially my parents have just cut me off about a year ago. So I do work.
Okay, sure.
So
that would really be the reality for so many out there, right? Because it's difficult to sort of, especially in the beginning, till you sort of, you know, make a name for yourself, or, you know, whatever you churn out will still have people picking it up and at least reading it and then reacting. Until then, it is going to be like this, and anywhere in the world. It's not really unique to India, is it?
Yeah, it's true everywhere. And in fact, in children's writing, even after you've made a name for yourself, such as this, it's not easy to make a living out of just writing.
As an individual, you have to make a decision of what you're going to write, and maybe you guys should give us some more space to put that message across. Right?
The fact that you're doing this, I think maybe that we are on the right path. But tell me, how did you get into writing? Like, when did the penny drop that this is what you wanted to do?
I was actually a journalist, so I just had some kind of an epiphany that I have to do something different, not writing per se, but something different. And I was just rereading Dan Brown. You know, I call my book a freak act of nature, because I was rereading Dan Brown one fine day, and I had this very random curiosity to know if there's something interesting in our own Indian history and culture, something that we can call esoteric, that royal secret that he talks about so wonderfully. So a very random search on the internet, and nothing because I want to write a book, just to know. And this wonderful legend pops up from some obscure website, extremely fascinating. One of our most celebrated Indian emperors. And what he did 2,000 years back, and I was like, this is mesmerizing. This has to be a story that I should tell. And that's when the whole thing started, that okay, I have to sit down and now write this book. So that's how it started. The journey started then and there.
A writer should essentially write what he or she wants to write, a story that perhaps they want to tell.
Yeah.
Does that really happen? In the sense that, is it dictated to you, or sort of do you have to sort of at the back of your mind, are you sort of worried about, will this really work, or am I going to like tweak it to what I believe they would like to read, as opposed to this is what I would like to say?
To be honest, no, I never think about, I mean, I never have. I've written one book and it's 70 pages long, and it's, and I'm trying to write my second now, but with Anushka and Shayani, it was never something I was doing. I mean, I knew I was writing for kids, but it was never something I was doing. It was mostly for myself. I think that's how they put it across to me. And I was 21 when I started writing it, and I was 22 when I finished. But I think maybe this is too naive and idealistic. Maybe it will change.
Maybe it will. But I'll take that back to Amitabh. Amitabh, you said once that just like writers in other times had to accept the whims and the vagaries of their royal patrons, we have to accept the idiosyncrasies of our patron. Explain to us how that affects your writing.
See, look, the patronage comes from the market today, and this is not new. It has been the case for 150 years, maybe 100 years or so in India, and longer in other places. So one has to make a decision. I think the main thing is one has to make a decision of which comes back to the previous question of what one wants to do, and then accept how far that can go in a scenario dominated by the market as a patron rather than as a connoisseur, as a patron.
Right, Anushka, you've heard that. Now, how much of that really plays out for children's writing when we talk about patronage? Because one does see, like we discussed earlier, one does see a lot more out there and some really terrific stuff.
Yeah. Things have certainly changed over 20 years. Like when my daughter was young, I couldn't find good Indian books for her. And now it's very different, because you go into a bookshop and there's a lot of young writers writing really unusual and fresh stuff, and that's lovely to see. But of course there's a balance to be, as publishers, there is a balance we maintain between publishing wacky fun stuff that we want out there and the things that the parents want and teachers want. It is changing. I mean, you do have, because the reading parents want their children to read books and enjoy them,
Exactly.
And unless you have books that are fun to read, how are children going to get into reading at all?
Right. And read, when we say read, I hope that we still I'm assuming that we still mean the old-fashioned book, right? Like
yes,
flip
absolutely.
pages, turn the pages, and dog-ear the pages, and that's what you read. I'm going to take a quick break, but before that, I want to ask the two of you. I mean, I know that this is what you're doing full-time. You're doing something alongside just because you need something to pay the bills, I understand. But I want to ask you both before we take a break, do you have to consciously think about like a what if, like a plan B? Does that play on your mind, or?
It does. I mean, I would be lying if I said it doesn't play out, but of course. But I think, so far since the journey has been good, the book's done really well. And, talking about pressure also, since we were talking about that in the earlier part, I think when you start to write, there's no pressure. It's when your book does well and now you're writing a second one, then the pressure starts coming in. You're hearing that I can't probably go for a different genre. I'm told to stick to my genre because you've been tested in that and it's done well. So those stuff do come in. That bit comes in so far, but I think so far
that's an important point you make. Because then I think that's a very different ball game.
Exactly.
And that's when you see many people trip, and that's true for all walks of life, I imagine. But that does happen. Rania?
And I don't know, but with me, this is not my job yet, like it's something that I've done and it's something I'm still trying to do. So whenever someone says, oh, you're a writer, come, like for example today, I'm still trying to be a writer. It's not my job. And I was living in Europe.
Do you hope that it will be your job?
Yeah, of course. I mean, eventually. I don't expect it to happen too soon. It's not, I've never thought it was going to be something that makes me money.
And you've not sort of in your head set any timelines that by the time I'm, I don't know, 25, 30, whatever it is, that I should
plan to start. So basically, my plan was to grow into like a writer personality by the time I was 25. I honestly didn't think I would publish anything. But
quickly, I'm going to get Amitabh and Anushka to quickly respond to that. That when you sort of, by the time I'm whatever, I will be doing this. Yes, I do have a plan B. But it's sort of, the insecurities are part of the course, I imagine.
But something, it's nice to see that people are actually thinking in terms of being writers, because when we were young, at least when I was young, I always wanted to write, but I never thought I would, I never thought of it as a career, as a possible career, because and that's changed, which is wonderful to see.
Also, see that writing is not just a profession; it's also a calling, and that there's something uplifting about it, and the pursuit of this career should also be a pursuit of that personal upliftment, which will then reflected in the books.
Very quickly, this is I promise this is the last bit before we take a break, which is, would you then say that when it comes to being a writer, for instance, either you have it or you don't? Actually, let me just rephrase that. When it comes to writing, either you can do it or you can't. I guess be a writer is a different ballgame altogether. But when you talk about writing, either you can do it or you can't. You can hone your skills and you can sharpen your skills and you can improve your skills. But you either hai ya nahi hai.
That would be a very harsh thing to say.
I see. Okay.
For a lot of people, and since I do have a day job and that's a professor, and I'm a professor in my other life, so I would not say that to someone, because there would be a lot of young people out there.
Sure.
I think one should always try, aim, but should be also realistic, and at some point, you know, if it's not working out, tell
Then
yourself
say, okay, maybe this wasn't for me. Well, that's a great note to end on. We're taking a quick break, coming back with lots more. Remember, keep your feedback coming in. Back in a moment. We're looking at writing in general, what we are reading, and Indian writers in particular. Well, quickly, before we go back to our panel, he also talks about writing is like giving voice to your soul. Others have a choice of not listening to you, but no one can stop your screaming out what you want to say, and writing is about that. The reason I bring this up is because I just want to also read out what Salman Rushdie has to say on this. And he says, I've always told myself to treat writing like a 9-to-5 job. You got to do it. Everyone's got to go out there and do it. And his argument for this is that if you don't tell yourself that it's a 9-to-5 job, you will never have the discipline to go out there and do it. Anushka, first to you. These are, of course, people who are doyens. So, you know, I guess it's easy for them to sort of only focus on writing when he says 9-to-5. It's because he doesn't need to fall back on anything else. But lots of writers always complain about the discipline, that how tough it is to have this discipline, and you know, the writer's block that we as journalists come to use all the time, quite liberally borrowed from writers. How do you sort of see this when we talk about the context of Indian writing?
See, as you said, it's difficult for an Indian writer to do that, to take it as a 9-to-5 job, unless you're Amish or Chetan maybe. But it is something that a lot of writers do, even if it's not 9-to-5. I know writers, I know friends of mine who make it a point to write for at least 3 hours every morning. You know, much of it will not be even publishable, but they feel that discipline is something that
you just need to keep doing it.
You people work differently, and there are writers who write completely erratically as well, you know, who write when the mood strikes them and don't if it doesn't. So, you know, there are all kinds of ways of being writers.
Amitabh, how does it work for you? Do you sort of tell yourself, no, got to sit down, got to do this today?
No, unfortunately, it's not possible to do that because of life coming in the way, and the job and so on and so forth, and the family. So I try to do when I can. I try to plan time for it. But I think there's one important thing that needs to be pointed out vis-a-vis Rushdie's thing. This idea of taking it as a 9-to-5 job is specifically important for women writers. What Rushdie says is that this is something like my wife, for example. She's a novelist, a fantastic novelist. But being a woman, she always feels that, you know, if I'm not making money off this, how can I prioritize it over my home and family and so on and so forth. For a male writer, I don't have those kind of social pressures to, you know, be useful in some other way. I can say, oh, I'm a writer, and so, you know, that's very important and all. And, you know, men are very good at
struggling writer, like struggling actor. You know, we romanticize, you know, the struggles that people have to go through.
Men are very good at projecting whatever we do as being extremely important. So that is not an issue. But for my own well-being as a person, writing is important, and so I have to prioritize that, and I have to find time for it. Regular time if possible, but if not, then not.
Sharan?
I think it is very important to have discipline. Which I don't. When I was doing a reading one time, this kid asked me, so she was like, why do you write? And I didn't know what to tell her. And then but like Amitabh said, like, you know, if I don't, then I feel like it's like for people who work out a lot. It's like if you don't, then you feel like you haven't exercised.
Something's not right with the day.
Something is not, and then you just need to, you need to do it just for yourself, for your brain.
Right. Satyarth, is that how it sort of works for you? Something is not, I mean, do you really actually sit down and do it every day?
I do. I'm a graveyard shift writer. I can only write at night somehow.
And it doesn't matter, like Anushka says, whether it's going to eventually see the light of day or not. See, you just need to externalize it, you just need to write it.
No, see, right now, since I'm in a position where I know I have an agency which is after my second book, so I know what I'm writing is for the market. I'm no longer writing in isolation where I'm writing just for the sake of an exercise, as Amitabh was talking about. being a writer who's already published and whose book has done well, you then become a privileged person who, as I said, who has people who now they want to know what are you writing next, and that pressure is on you.
Who's deciding what you're writing next? How much of that is your decision?
Well, see, I think at this point it's kind of mutual, because of course I've had a discussion with my agency. They know what I'm writing. They know what I'm, what I plan for the next 3 years. So in a way, we are kind of very clear about that. But having said that, is that you're not allowed to stray too much on the path that you've chosen. You kind of, they would expect you to stick to what has worked so far. Like I remember telling my agency that I would love to write an anthology next. Why should I stick to another mystery thriller? And the answer was कि ठीक है, लेकिन थोड़े और famous हो जाओ, फिर anthology देखना. So that's the mindset somewhere as well.
That's a lot of pressure, isn't there? Because even with the biggest writers that we have globally, not every work will always sort of match up, and especially if your first hit has been huge. And even a Vikram Seth is constantly having to explain why, at the end of the day you come back to a suitable girl because a suitable boy was where it was. So then eventually there's pressure to match up with suitable girl. What about all the great work that might have been in Avatar?
I basically write the books that I want to write.
Right.
And the thing is that once a book goes out, after an initial sort of interaction with the market and all, it tends, I mean, these guys are still new in the game, so they don't know, you tend to float away into this space of your own, and where it's just you, your job, your family, this, that. So you kind of forget, that success, etc. It just sort of goes away into the background. And it's you and the book. It's you and the book that you have to write. At the end of the day, it is an internal process which has some internal goals, and you're trying to achieve those goals, and you don't even know what they are to begin with.
Sure. Quickly, I'm wrapping up quickly.
As a publisher, I just wish more people would write like that.
Right.
Because more and more we're getting, the slash
what they
pile that we
believe
get,
will
they
the
think
blockbuster.
of what will sell, what might sell. So we're constantly getting dystopian novels, or we're getting romances, which are kind of Ravindra Singh kind of thing, trying to be Ravindra Singh kind of romances, which are just completely, just don't work because the writer's soul is not in it,
Right.
I think that even for whoever you're writing for, if you feel it, if if it's coming from within, it will have an impact.
Right.
You can't skim off the surface and hope to have an impact. Then you're just a copier.
Right. I guess that's enough tips there for Satyarth and Sharatya to sort of hold on to, not skimming the surface. And eventually you have to be in the driver's seat. Well, I'm completely out of time, but thanks all so much for taking our time to speak to us. Well, then it's a wrap on the show. So many of you writing in with what you love to read. Well, keep your thoughts coming in. We're at feedback@ndtv.com. You can also tweet us or get onto our Facebook page. From all of us then, goodbye. Thanks for watching.
Catch the heads-up episodes you might have missed during the week at these times only on NDTV Prime.